Okay, page Kuf Yud Aleph, the bottom paragraph, Nimtzeis. Okay, he's summing up what we had said, finishing up the parak. Okay, Nimtzeis Lamad. So it comes out that we've learned the following. Shehabala his chassid, chasidus amiti. Someone who wants to be a true chassid. Tzorech sheyishkol kol ma'asov. He has to weigh all of his actions. Lefi hatoylodos hanimshachos mehem, according to the results that will come out of them. A person has to think about what his actions are going to cause, and not just act without thinking. Lefi hatnoim hamislavim lohem, lefi ha'es, according to the different conditions that come along with specific action. Excuse me, depending on the time. Lefi ha'chevra, according to the people around. Lefi ha'noisei, the subject. Lefi ha'makom, and the place. It's not enough just to say this is what I do. You have to know where you do it and when you do it. And not always is something that was right to do last year the right thing to do this year. Not always is the right conversation of last year the right conversation of this year. If not doing an act of chasidus will cause more kiddush Hashem, v'nachas ruach lefanav, and more nachas min ha'maisa, than the action, yifresh, then he should separate himself. He shouldn't do it. V'lo yaseh. Oye maisa echad b'mar isay hutayv. If a certain action on the surface it looks like it's good, it looks okay, but ubetel daisav oibitnaav hura, but in what will come out from it and its conditions, it comes out to be bad. Sometimes you can have something that looks very bad in the way it appears. But good will come out of it. Everything depends on what comes out. Is that always true? The ends justify the means? Didn't he just say that the ends justify the means? He says, Hakol, what's the words here? Hakol hailech achar hachitum v'hatoilada. Everything goes after the way it is in the end. No? Sounds like the ends justify the means, right? Show pri hamaisim be'emes. That's really the fruits of your actions. The ends justify the means?
Not all the time, no.
What?
Not all the time.
So the answer is that it's because we're talking about chasidus here. In other words, when we're talking about the extra things that I do, the things that aren't halacha, then whether I should do it or not, the ends justify the means. But if we're talking about halacha, so then you got to do what Hashem told you to do. Right? It's just when we're talking about inyanim of chasidus, I'll give you an example. Let's say you're makbid to go to the mikveh every morning before davening, as many chasidim are. Okay, and you're in a place and you say, "Can I go to the mikveh?" And they say, "No. This mikveh we keep for tefillas of a mitzvah, for a women's mikveh. We don't want men to go in there." But you are such a chassid. I know stories like this. You're such a chassid that you break into the mikveh to go to the mikveh Shabbos morning. Is that chasidus? Or is that Geneva? Yeah, it's Geneva. It's Geneva with a beard and payas, It's like holy Geneva,
Same thing apply whether going to mikvah or davening with tzibur at the right time. If you're going to go
to that's a good point. Like what happens, and this may depend a little bit on the Messiah and so on. What if a person goes to the mikveh every morning? Simcha is asking. But if he goes this morning, he's going to miss davening with a minyan. Or he's going to miss Zman Tefillah.
Don't go to the mikvah.
Don't go to the mikveh. The mikveh is an act of chasidus. Interesting, no? Interesting. You have to know what you're weighing. What are you weighing it against? What happens if you're staying at someone's house for Pesach, and your minig is to say Hallel in shul Pesach night, but the person whose house you're staying at does not have the minig to say Hallel Pesach night? Do you just say Hallel quickly to yourself and go join his Seder? Or do you show up by his Seder an hour late because you stayed to say Hallel? You have to think about what?
It depends who you are.
Well, I'm not asking what you do. I'm asking what you should do.
What you should do is go.
Right. So this
That's
is
how
a
people think.
this is something a person has to be aware of. Let me ask you this question: your family is waiting for you to start a Shabbos meal, and your friend stops you on your way home from shul and starts schmoozing with you, and you really, really want to spend the time with him. Maybe he needs the friendship, but your wife and kids are waiting at home. So what do? You do the chesed of schmoozing with your friend and coming home a little drunk and a little full, or you go home and eat a Shabbos meal with your family. These are all decisions. This parak of Mishkal HaChasidus is something that we deal with all the time to try to figure out what the results of our actions are. What's the outcome? What will it lead to? The ein advarim mesurim ela lelev mevin v'seichel nachan. You need to have an understanding heart and intelligence. Someone is speaking and they make a mistake. Do you speak up and correct them? It's a very good question. You have to know where you are, when it is, what your relationship is. No, you have to make a lot of cheshbonos. You can't just be like, no, you quoted the pasuk wrong, Or like some people when they're like, you have a guy making a siyum, for example, right? So he's saying all the psukim of the siyum, which some guys have a hard time pronouncing, So, so a lot of guys making a siyum for the first time will say v'hakitzaisa hi sishichecha instead of sisichecha. Sin, shin, it's hard to keep track. And sometimes you have a guy sitting there by the siyum going like this. Like broadcasting his disappointment. Keep it to yourself. It's not the time. I'm glad you know how to read. It's not the time to advertise what a big Talmid Chacham you are. It's a time to appreciate what the person said. A person comes over and tells you a chiddush that he had. This happens to me all the time. A person comes over and tells you a chiddush that he had, and you strongly disagree with it, and you think it's ridiculous. When do you say nice vart, and when do you say I look at it differently? You can't make rules about something like that. You have to have a leiv maven v'seichel nachon. You have to have an understanding heart and a healthy mind. And lives could be at stake, Somebody respects you, depending on how you react, you can make a difference in his life. Ki ef shelevayer hapratim. You can't start saying all the details. She'ein lahem kates. There's no end. There's no end to these details. V'Hashem yitein chachma mipiv das usvuna. Hashem is the one who gives us chachma and das and svuna. That's something that we have to daven, that Hashem should give us the wisdom to make the right choices about things. Your parents want you home for Shabbos. You want to stay in yeshiva. Do you go or do you stay? Kibbut Avayim, Talmud Torah. But it's deeper than that, even if it's not an issue of Kibbut Avayim or Talmud Torah. But sometimes it's better to give in. Sometimes it's better not to. Even if they'll be Michael, you know what I mean? But the decisions that we make have an impact. There's a story with Reb Tarfon. Shehichmir lahatois kebeis Shammai. Beis Shammai has a shita that when you say Kriya Shema at night, you have to say it lying down, because it says you should say Shema b'shachbecha. Beis Hillel says it's the time that you lay down. We say Kriya Shema at night. Beis Shammai says you should say it lying down. So Reb Tarfon was machmir, and he leaned. He didn't lie down completely, but he leaned it to be makai. You're chayiv misa. She'avarta al divrei Beis Hillel, because you are over on divrei Beis Hillel. Not every chumrah is the right thing to do. Sometimes it's the wrong thing to do. What do you mean he was machmer? What's wrong with the chumrah? What was wrong? He did like Beis Shammai. What's so terrible? It's not so hard to lay down. Like, what's the big deal? What? Maybe. That's true. The Ramchal says that it was a very, very controversial topic at the time. Beis Hillel or Beis Shammai. And since the halacha was based like Beis Hillel, he was rocking the boat by doing like Beis Shammai. He shouldn't have done that. She'inyan machlokes Beis Shammai or Beis Hillel inyan kaved leYisrael. Mipnei hamachlokes hagedayla sherabsu b'nei. There was a lot of machlokes. The Saif Nigmar, eventually through a Baskal, actually, it was decided that the halacha is always like Beis Hillel, with only certain exceptions. Hine kiyuma shel Torah. They're very interesting. There's my father told me that many years ago, Chacham Ovadia Yosef came when he was the chief rabbi of the state of Israel. He came to Lakewood Yeshiva to speak. And he came to a security there, the Secret Service, Mossad, whatever it is, it should bet, the Secret Service, and they and he came to speak. And it was controversial at the time. You know, there were Hasidim came to protest that he was there. It was very controversial. And he said a very interesting thing. He said that it's well known, there's a sugya in Masechet Bava Metzia called Tanur Shelachnai. It's a sugya where Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkenes, who was a Talmud of Beis Shammai, had a shita, and the Chachamim disagreed with him. So he started to perform miracles. You ever heard this sugya? He started to perform miracles to make sure, to show that Min HaShamayim they want to do like him. He made the river flow in the wrong direction. The walls of the Beis Medrash almost came down. He made the walls of the Beis Medrash start leaning down. And finally a Baskal came out, and the Chachamim wouldn't listen. The Chachamim said, Torah is Lei Bashamayim. So, Yotzisa Baskal v'Amra, Baskal, a voice from Shamayim, came out and said, Nitzchuni banai nitzchuni. What does that mean? You won. You conquered me, right? L'natseach, right? You won. You conquered me. As if there was some kind of competition between Shamayim and Oretz won, right? Said Chacham Ovadia, that's not what it means. The word L'natseach has another word, and that's the word Netzach. L'netzach nitzachim. He said, Nitzchuni banai nitzchuni means you eternalized me. Because if we will always paskin shilas by who can make a bigger miracle, could you imagine the havoc in Klal Yisrael? We would no longer be being down in the Beis Medrash, you know? It would be who has a longer beard, who has more shiny eyes. You know, it would become a whole game, paskin shilas. It needs to be in the Beis Medrash. It needs to be the war of Torah. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu wasn't saying you conquered me. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was saying you made me eternal. You kept the Torah alive. When Reb Tarfon did like Beis Shammai, it was a little bit of the opposite thing. Like, we just came out that the halacha is like Beis Hillel. Now you're doing like Beis Shammai. It's very nice Chumrah, but now your Chumrah is weakening what we just said. It's not the time for the Chumrah. There are times for Chumrahs. This is not that time. Hine kiyuma shel Torah shegmar din ze yishar b'chol toikif lo adu la'olmei olamim. You know, the fulfillment of the Torah, that this should remain forever. V'lo yechlash b'shum panim, and should not become weak. Shaloi teyasa Torah chas v'shalom kishtei Torahs. That there shouldn't, you know, there was a sakana that Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai would break off into two religions. Because Beis Shammai had such a different way of life than Beis Hillel, if you count all the machlokes in between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. And by paskening that the whole Klal Yisrael will do like Beis Hillel, they saved Klal Yisrael. Now you go ahead and you're machmer like Beis Shammai, you crazy? I shouldn't say that on Reb Tarfon, but you don't do something like that. Therefore, the opinion of the Mishnah is Yoiser Chasidus. It's bigger chasidus not to be machmer. Afilu lekula, even though it's a kula, milachmer kebeis Shammai than to be machmer like Beis Shammai. V'zel lanu le'einayim. This is eyes for us. This is megala to us. Lirois eze derech yishkain or be'emes u'be'emuna. What derech a person should go? La'asois hayoshar be'einay Hashem. To do what's straight in the eyes of Hashem. This is a very, very important thing. You know where this comes up a lot? Being oiches b'machlokes. A lot of times in Klal Yisrael, different arguments come up between different factions in Klal Yisrael. And sometimes when the machlokes falls into the wrong hands, it actually becomes a bitter, brutal, terrible argument. But there many times when there were machlokes in Klal Yisrael, the heads of both machlokes were big tzaddikim, big talmidei chachamim, ge'onei olam. And there's such a thing as a machlokes shehi l'shem shamayim. Sometimes we're feisty people and our opinions are important to us. And there's a lot at stake and we say our opinions and our opinions matter. But sometimes you find that people hold on to machlokes when it already expired. You know what I mean? We're like, done. We're not doing that machlokes anymore. We're done. Okay, it's time to move on. And people are still fighting the machlokes. Leave it alone. It's over. Let's move on. Forget about it. And you think you're being so frum that because sometimes people say my Rebbe or my Rebbe's Rebbe was very strong in this machlokes. Yeah, but do you know if he would be strong about it today? If he's alive and he's doing it, so you do what your Rebbe does. But very often, it's 2 generations later. There was a machlokes between the Hasidim and the Snagdim in the early days of Hasidus. We don't even understand the machlokes. People sit like babies and talk about it. It's childish. What machlokes? You don't even know what you're talking about. You don't know what they argued about. What you think is Misnagdim is Hasidim, or you think is Hasidim is Misnagdim. You have no idea. There were issues with the Musar movement. Pro-Musar, anti-Musar. We have no idea. If we get to learn some Musar, we're lucky. We learn a little, it's time to stop, we have to be careful when we're oiches b'machlokes. What are we doing? I think we're such machmirim. Don't do that. But on the other hand, sometimes we do have to stand up. I had a situation where, I'll give you an example, where I made a macha. It wasn't a loud, obnoxious macha, but I made a little bit of a macha. There was, these fasting pills, these capsules that they take with slow release. The medicines, the vitamins, or Tylenol, Advil, caffeine, all this stuff. So a lot of them are produced by a koil in Toronto, the koil of Toronto. And it's a fundraiser for the koil. They charge a lot of money for them. And it's a fundraiser. Anyway, there was a big shaila this year because Tisha B'Av was Matzah Shabbos. Are you allowed to take the pills on Shabbos because it's Hachana for after Shabbos? Okay? It was a big big shaila. Reb Shlomo Miller asking that you are allowed to. Coincidentally, Reb Shlomo Miller is the Rosh Koil of the Koil of Toronto that sells these pills. And people were saying, when I was in shul, I spoke about this shaila, and then people came around afterwards to say good Shabbos. 1 or 2 people cynically said, yeah, of course Reb Shlomo Miller said it's mutter. His koil is making money off it. Now, if you know Reb Shlomo Miller, he's a Talmud of Rav Aaron Kotler, who's a Tzadik Levracha. He's a Tzadik Yisayid Olam. He's a Talmud Chacham Muflug. Chazal say to be very careful when you talk about Talmidei Chachamim that you shouldn't be burned by their fire. Because Talmidei Chachamim are fire. And I did not want to be burned by his fire. So when people said to me, oh, Reb Shlomo Miller, of course, he's the Rosh Koil, I'd be like, do not say that. I think he's a big enough tzaddik that if he loses a few $100 this Tisha B'Av, in order to be honest in halacha, he will do that. And if he says it was mutter, it's because it was mutter. And I don't think we should be chayshish that I have a great idea. I'll lie about the halacha, and then I'll make a few more dollars for my koila, which I do to support Talmud Torah. That doesn't make sense. Stop it. I don't like the cynicism. Be careful. You're talking about a Talmud Chacham. So sometimes the right thing is leave it alone. Enough with the machlokes. Sometimes the right thing is that we have to say something. Someone's being mavaza a Talmud Chacham. You have to say something. You're not allowed to just stand there. Someone starts saying something berabim about someone that you know to be a real Talmud Chacham. You can't just sit there. You have to say, "I'm sorry, I don't agree." You don't have to get into a fight with the guy. I don't agree. I'm leaving this conversation. I do not agree. I do not. You don't want to get burned. I'm saying, trust me. You have to be able to do that, to make those calls You need to have a strong seichel. You have to be intelligent. When do we leave it alone, and when do we get involved in it? You know, there are stories in yeshiva sometimes with like two Rosh Yeshiva would get into a machlokes, and half the yeshiva is on this one side, and half the yeshiva is on this one side, and probably the two Rosh Yeshivas should be able to fight without the Talmidim getting involved at all. That's probably the biggest Kiddush Hashem. And running to the defense of the one that you're closer to is not necessarily Chasidus. You know what I mean? Maybe it's more being marbib and machlokes. And so on and so forth. Many, many examples of that. I heard a story once. There was a guy who was walking around a very intense shul. I don't want to say where it is. But it was a very intense shul. And a guy was walking around in shorts and flip-flops. And someone walked over and said, our Rav doesn't like people to be in the shul with flip-flops, so please leave. Okay? What a chassid. What a chassid. Standing up for the honor of davening in the shul. Yeah, except, I know the story about this guy. Okay? This guy was an addict. And he was in a step down, sober living place. And it was his son's bar mitzvah. I'm sorry, it was his friend's son's bar mitzvah. There were two guys in the sober living place. And one of them, it was his son's bar mitzvah. And the guy traveled to his back home from the sober living to be by his son's bar mitzvah. But they were afraid for him to travel himself. They were afraid he would lose his sobriety. So they sent a friend with him who was not religious, but who grew up very religious. And that friend showed up in this shul with flip-flops and shorts and long hair. The friend was so distant from religion that sometimes when he wanted to pray, he would go to church. Okay? And he was visiting a frum community for the first time in years just to do a favor to his friend whose son was being bar mitzvahed. Do you think it was Chasidus to tell this guy to walk out of the shul? Can you imagine if someone had walked over to him and said, I'm so happy you're here. Here's the coffee. Here's the tea. Please make yourself at home. What do you think would be better for Klal Yisrael? What do you think HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be happy with? You're so machbid on Kavod HaTfilah, you don't like that the guy's wearing flip-flops? The Kayhanim served Hashem barefoot. Like, calm down. But sometimes we think we're Hasidim when we're not being Hasidim. That's a failure. In the Mishkal, not Hasidus, it's a failure. There was an opportunity to bring someone back. And the opportunity was lost because of the misconception of Hasidus. It's very important for us to make the right cheshbon. On the other hand, one day you'll have a wife and a few children, and you may have a friend who's not religious staying in the house, and you may ask him if he could wear a yarmulke in the house while he's there, just so that it's not confusing for your children. You may ask him that. You're going to have to make a judgment call. Maybe you'll call a Rebbe or speak to your Rav to decide how to handle it. It's a little delicate. I once had a Talmud who was struggling with his Yiddishkeit, showed up at my house once. My oldest daughter was about 8, and she answers the door, and he came in sporting a new earring, the guy, on one ear. And we didn't raise our kids to be such Hasidim. My daughter opens the door and says, "Hey Yoni, how's it going? Nice earring." She was a basic girl. She didn't know anything about this. But that's what you do, right? Like, I don't know if I can let you in. I see you wearing an earring. Hold on, I'm calling my father. Like, calm down. She's an Orthodox Jewish mother today. Everything's okay. Ellie, it's a judgment. It's not so simple. You have to know who's coming, what's the impact, what are the ages of your children. Are people who are maybe have dangerous views going to be schmoozing with your children? What kind of conversations with it? Boys, girls, where are they up to? Are they struggling? What's your relationship with them? There's a lot of pieces of that. That's why we need to stay alive and alert and have a mishkal, to have a balance of Chasidus. And that's the lesson. Amir Hashem, next time we'll start the 21st parak of how to be kaina chasidus be'ezer Hashem.